So one of my bucket list items has always been to try to see if I could figure out how to put a kickstart on one of these old Gen 1 Viragos. So I'm going to have a look, see if there's any way that I could put a kickstart on this thing without doing major modifications to the motor. Looks like somehow you'd be able to get something on this thing. I've looked inside of them quite a bit and never really found a good place, so we're going to have a closer look at it and see if we can't figure out what we're going to do. Alright, so here we are looking at our parts motor. If we look on this side of the motor, normally, like the kicker would be over here for every bike I've ever seen. I think some of the Europeans are on the other side, but the kicker's over here. But when you look around in here, there's just not anywhere that you can catch the gear. So if I spin around the other way, we'll look at the other side of the motor. Of course, this is the left side of the motor. So I'm looking at this and thinking, well, I got a hole coming in this side right here where you can access the end of the crank. And so I wonder if I could get something on the end of that crank right there, then maybe I could just crank it over. So I've already taken, and if you're familiar with the Bendix on the current Gen 1s, it has a gear on top of this right here, and that's what flies out to engage the flywheel inside. So I've already ground this one off over there on the mill, and it worked pretty good. Didn't die from it or anything, so seemed to be a good process to grind things down. Now what I need to do is put the teeth for the ratchet on the inside of this right here. So we're going to set up on that here in a little while once we grind that other gear down. So then the thought would be, all I need to do is figure out how to put a shaft on there and put the kicker on there, so this inside of there, and then when I kick the bike, I'll grab the inside of the Bendix. What it'll do is advance it to the ratchet, kick the bike, and then when I release the kicker, it'll come back. Or if the motor starts, it'll flick it back out just like it normally does. So I think that might be a way to go to try to see if we can put a kickstart on this bike. So we're going to continue to set up on this, and I'm going to get over there and do some more grinding, and then we'll work our way on down to see if we can figure out. Alright, so after a little bit of creative angle grinding, now we got our center part that goes inside of the original gear. And we got our ratchet that's off the Suzuki, and we got our teeth cut in. So now we got our ratchet. Alright, so after a few trips around with the end mill, we have got the ring cut off first. Let's bring everything up, and then inside of here, you should be able to take the center ring out. So there we go. So now we got the center ring cut out of there. That gives us a little bit of room for us to put our hub on there. So there we go. So let's get that cleaned up, and we'll be ready for the next step. So we got our big chunk of metal up in the little lathe, and started some work on it, and we got our drawing finished up. So we're going to try to make this hub that's going to allow us to hook that gearing up on there. Alright, so after a few hours on the lathe, we got our little part that looks like our drawing. So that looks pretty good. So now we got to head over to the mill, and I got to cut these teeth in here in the end of that so I can put my gear on the end of that there. So we have moved over to the mill and got set up, and what I'm going to do is cut these little teeth in there so I can put my ratchet gear on the end of that. So we're set up with a 1/8 inch mill bit. We're just going to run back and forth and cut these teeth, and then we'll have that part finished up. And then the last step will be to drill the 3 holes in the back so I can mount it to the flywheel. Alright, so after a little machining, we got our spline made. So now we can put our back washer on and our little gear And now we got our ratchet attached to our hub that's going to attach to our flywheel. So got a little groove in there for a retainer clip, and we should be about finished up with the hub. Now I just got to put the 3 holes in it. Let's see if our bolt will fit in there, and she does. No problem. Alright, so we are ready to switch over and do the next hole. So we'll just bolt the flywheel back on, take this out, bolt the flywheel on, and then put it back in here, and we'll drill the other 2. And there we go. We just got to clean it up and identify one of these holes to line up with the flywheel. We'll identify that. And then the only thing left to do is to flip it over, and we need the counter bore for the bolt head to get the bolt head to go down in there flush, and we'll be in pretty good shape. So we'll get set back up and do the counter bore, and we'll be done with the hub. Alright, so we got everything machined up on our little hub. Looks good. Now we'll put it together and see if this thing all fits. So we put our flywheel back on. Then we just got to put our bolts in here. And keep in mind, we're just doing this as an experiment to see if we can kick it. Eventually I'd like to get the Kickstarter over on the other side, but for right now we'll see, without having to modify the motor, if we can actually kick it over. Then that'll entice us to work a little harder to finish out the other stuff. We got all that. Now we can put the cover on. And I got the gasket that's going to go around that, but I'm not going to put it on this test one. I'm going to save that for when I actually do the install. So there'll be a little seal that goes right around there. Keeps the oil from coming out. Well, let's bolt our case down. Alright, so let's see if we got clearance. Oh yeah. So it rotates just the same. Alright, so then we just have to put our washer in the back. And we line up our gear. And then we install our E-clip. There we go. So now it's locked on it. So there we are. We have successfully gotten our ratchet out of the side of this motor without modifying anything. So then the next stop, here's the outside. It's going to be for the removable kicker. And so that's going to go on like that. And then when I kick it, it'll kick it over like that. So what's next is, this is about 17 millimeter, and I got to get these gears onto that kicker shaft, and so it's a lot bigger. So we're going to have to set up over on the lathe and cut this down, and I've already blued it so you can see the different color. Did a test cut on it, so I blued it just to get that hardness down a little bit. And then there's a hole right in the middle that's probably going to break my carbide tool when I come across it. So I'm just going to take a grinder and grind that part down, and then it'll skip over the top of it as I'm cutting. So once I get this down, I get it inside of here, then I'll just weld it to this gear, and then we'll have the kicker attached to the ratchet. Alright, so after a little time on the South Bend lathe, we got our part machined down. I'll tell you what, this little South Bend blade to be 80 years old just continues to amaze me on its accuracy. And look at that. I mean, not even any play in it. So now we got our shaft made. That's going to go on there. And then that's going to go on there. And now we're ready to start making the housing that's going to all fit in. That's going to bolt to the side of the motor. Alright, time for a little more creative machining. And what I got to do is get this bearing up onto that surface right there, because I don't need all that anymore. I just need the last little bit. So since it's hard and I want to keep it hardened, I'm just going to grind a little bit off, and that way I can get the bearing up on there, and that's going to go inside of the cover on the outside of the motor. Alright, so after some creative grinding, now we can put our ratchet on. It's going to go all in, and now we got our big bearing, and it slides right up on there. So there. Now we've got just enough room to engage and disengage the ratchet, and the bearing is what's going to ride inside the housing. So that worked out pretty good for a one-off here prototype. I guess if I was going to make more than one of these, since I don't even know if it's going to work, I sure wouldn't be doing it this way. But works pretty good with a angle grinder mounted up to the tool post. Then you can run it in and out and get things cut. So not too bad, fits pretty good. So there we go, we got that part done. Now I think we can start prepping for the housing that's going to attach to the side of the motor case. And there we go. We got to do that 2 more times and we'll have the 3 holes at least drilled. And then we can flip it around and do a little more machining. So now we got our holes put in, and I got the little reliefs in for those little pockets that are on the side of the motor casing. And there's a little relief right there for that little arrow that sits up above to tell you which way to turn the crank. So now we're lined up on our hole, and we're going to cut this hole in here. So we get this done, then we'll be ready to do a little test fit. We're making some progress. Now we got a big old plate on there, and of course it's big bulky right now, but we'll machine that down after we get all the mechanics done. So here's our little ratcheting mechanism. So that's going to just go right in there. So then, as you rotate it, it grabs the mechanism. Alright, so now we just got to figure out how to get it to stay in there so when I kick it, it doesn't try to come out. So got this big old gear, and what I'm going to do is machine that down, take all the teeth off of it because it's a nice hardened gear. And we're going to make us a little plate that's going to capture that so that I can take it off and on, and then it'll hit like a keyway, and then it'll go in, stay locked in, and then I can pull it back out. We get all these teeth cut off, and then we'll head over to the lathe to clean it up. Alright, so a few more parts to make. And this is going to be the locking key. And what that does is when I put the whole Kickstarter assembly in there, this little tab is going to lock in behind that big plate that used to be a gear that I was machining on. And so that'll prevent the Kickstarter from jumping back out when I kick down on it. So it'll lock in and go inside a little groove. So we got to open that hole up so it can fit up on the hub gear. And then we'll be ready to go with this piece. So we got our little key machined with the right diameter. So now I got to get it to fit up onto this gear right here. So I cut a few teeth. I don't need all the teeth in there, so I just cut 3 teeth. And now what I'm going to do is relieve all that material so the little teeth will slide down in there. And then I can get it right up beside the bearing. After a little bit of milling, we got our little teeth, and they're on that funny little slope. So now we can take our assembly we're working on. It's got the ratchet and the bearing goes in the front, and then this guy's gonna sit on those little teeth right there. Whoop, goes right in there like that. So then this whole assembly is gonna be able to go right inside of there. So now when you kick it, it'll lock and then it'll free itself up. And what this is going to do is keep it in there, because I'm going to have this ring over the top of it, and then on the back side of the ring I'm going to put a slot. And so there'll be a little hole right there for that to go through, and also for my spring clip to go through. And then I'll be able to lock it in, kick it, and then I can take it back up, index it, and pull it back out. Little groove made for the clip that goes on the Bendix, and we got the big cutout made that's going to keep it on the side of the motor when I kick it. The little tab is going to swing in there, and then it'll come back out the key. So we got our little plate done and a temporary guide there, so we can bring it down and drill our 3 holes. So I already got started. So now just drill these holes out. Do the other 2, and we will come ever so much closer to having this mounted. Alright, so we are almost done with the mechanics of this thing. And what we need to do now is make a little ramp right here. And what that's going to be for is if I kick it, when I kick it down, if the engine kicks back, it'll bring it back up and it won't hit that wall. It'll actually hit the ramp and it'll disengage the Kickstarter. That way it doesn't tear something up if it tries to kick back on me. So we'll get set up here and we're going to cut this little ramp in. We're coming down to it, and one of the last items we got to do is slot back in here so we can make room for our wire clip for the Bendix. And so we're just going to cut down in there, and then we're really close to being done. After this, about all we got to do is figure out how to put a spring on there so the kicker will return, and then pretty this thing up a little bit, get rid of some of this mass, and we should be really close. Alright, just got to do that a few more times and get our groove in there. So we got everything made on the motor side. We got our mechanisms tracked, so he'll sit right down in there, kick. And we got the spring cut down, the big old spring. It used to be twice as thick. Cut that down, shaved him off. And my shop is getting nasty. I'll be glad when I get this project done. And then we got a little spacer that holds the spring, so the little spacer goes on, and then the spring goes on like that. Then we got our spring plate, so that's got to get welded on there, but we're going to do a trowel, so then we can put a washer on. And let's put our kicker on. Like that. Get the kicker put in place. Get our bolt in the kicker so it won't fly out. There we go. So that'd be our whole mechanism. I gotta weld that on there and give it some strength. But that should allow it to kick and return. So now we just put our kicker in there. Get everything lined up. So now when we kick it, watch our piston. Now I kick it and it'll return. So we're almost there. All we got to do now is weld that up and then make it kind of pretty, and we're going to call this thing just about complete. Alright, so we got everything done mechanically. Now we just need to take a little weight off this thing, and so we're going to fly cut around and give it a little bit of profile. So let's get set up here. Break some corners off right here to make them look pretty, and counter bore those holes. We should be in pretty good shape. And the last step in our kicker maker is to take this edge off and get it to transition up to the motor. So we'll get that took off here. And there we go. So now we got it all cleaned up, ready to reassemble and see if this little guy will work. We got our kicker finished and everything is set up now, so it's looks really good. Next stop will be to put it on the cafe racer and see if we can kick the cafe over, but it works quite well. You can see the piston up here, so when I kick it, it'll kick it over and it ratchets back, picks it back up, and so then once you get it started, pull it back and you can remove it. And I just got to make a little cover or something pretty there for the side of the bike so I can flip it up, put the kicker in, then I can kick it and take it back up. So there we go. There's our first try at making a kicker for a Gen Virago. And hopefully we'll be able to kick it off. So we'll make another video of me installing it on the cafe racer, and then once I get it wired up, we'll try to kick that over. Well, alrighty. Well, thanks for watching.